Good morning. Thanks very much for your attention. Just to plan our next 40 minutes together, Her Excellency has to leave at 10:45, not because she doesn't love St. Gallen or Switzerland, I understand, but because you have to catch a flight. So we're going to be very direct. That gives us about 20 to 25 minutes for one-on-one questioning. She and I had the great pleasure of doing a one-on-one interview, so we had a good chance to warm up, and I know where her head is. Then we wanted to open up the floor, of course, for 10 to 15 minutes of questions as well. I would ask, because of the limited time that we have with Ngozi, is to ask very direct questions so we can get a direct response for her because of the time constraints and her schedule this morning. Now, I find it interesting because if you look at Nigeria, it's been one of the most promising economies in the last decade, averaging growth of better than 7%. But it hasn't been able to avoid the downturn that we've seen in most developing markets around the world. Nigeria's case is quite particular in the sense that of its dependency on oil and gas. So instead of growth of 7% and above the last couple of years, it's growth of 4.8 to maybe 5% in 2015. Not bad, but is it enough to drive the ambitions of somebody like the minister and the new government that's coming in at the end of May? Which raises also an interesting point. After 16 years of democracy, there was a great concern that there would not be a natural transition of power or one that wouldn't require the military to step in. It did take place. Now, the other Nigeria is one where too many people live on less than $2 a day. We have a north-south divide, particularly what takes place in the northeast, and you'd have to be living in a cave not to see what happened with Boko Haram over the last 2 years, but accelerated over the last year with the kidnapping and abduction and quite candidly crimes against humanity against 2,000 women and children. In the last 2 weeks in particular, we've seen 700 of them freed, but still more needs to be done. And there is an economic component to that, which I'd like to bring up with the minister. Let's give her a warm St. Gallen welcome before we start our roundtable. There's two Nigerias, and I know you've been working tirelessly in two different terms in government and dedicating your time. The last 4 years, you've been wanting to diversify the economy and unleash the growth. It is a phenomenal market, 170 million consumers, a love for services, whether it's banking services, mobile services, the desire to own property, to diversify the farming sector as well. Would you say you got as much done as you thought you would in the 4 years and the second time around as finance minister?
I would have loved to be able to do more, but we got a lot done. It's much harder to work on the real sectors of the economy, to change them. During the time I was finance minister the first time, we did a lot of macroeconomic reforms to stabilize the economy because it was very volatile. This time around, we focused on building institutions. I think that the difference between developed and developing countries is the absence of these institutions. And those are the institutions that will help us to fight poverty, to create wealth. We got a lot done. Let me just mention 2 or 3 examples, since we don't have time. One of them is really not sexy at all, excuse my language, because people's eyes glaze over. One of the missing systems processes is just simply a modernized financial management system. It's necessary because you have to plug leakages in the economy. What did we do? We introduced a government-integrated financial management system. What does it mean? We put an electronic system in place so that the Treasury and the Budget Office can be connected. We don't have to transfer cash around, which leads to leakages. We also use technology, biometrics. I believe so strongly in it. All our personnel to be biometrically registered so we can pay them directly. Again, what does it mean? We don't have to transfer cash around, and that means that people cannot introduce what we call ghost workers. By doing this, we weeded out more than 50,000 ghost workers, people who had been introduced into the system, and people were collecting their salaries. And that's a real savings for the economy.
Now, the subject deals with having the natural blessing of oil reserves, second largest proven reserves on the African continent after Libya. not enough refining capacity, not enough investment into the oil and gas sector to move downstream according to the demands of the population of 170 million consumers. Has the oil wealth actually held back economic diversification? In a sense, the $100 oil that we had for 5 years almost spoiled Nigeria and held back the push for reform.
I believe, yes, that it's going to sound funny, but actually I'm a finance minister who does not mind having an oil price that is moderate. The reason is that I strongly believe my country is more of a non-oil economy than an oil economy. Oil is 15% of GDP. After we rebase the economy, it's now the largest in Africa, with a GDP of 510 billion. South Africa is about 386 billion,
Which
just
is 25
for comparison.
in the world, is that right? 25 now?
Yeah, we are number 26 or so in the world, and we are first in Africa. We found that the economy is not for size. The issue is not about the size, but the diversity. We found that services is about 51%, manufacturing industry about 26%, agriculture is still a healthy 22%. Creative industries, the arts that never existed in GDP, 1.4%, and telecommunications has grown from 0.7 to about 9% over a decade. So what does that mean? That means that we have the base to really be a non-oil economy. And I think it's good because I want to share one chart with you. The next one. I want you to see how the oil and gas map is changing, even in Africa. And if we don't move away from focusing on oil too much to other sectors, we will continue to be subject to volatility, to supply shocks, to demand shocks. If people can look from 1975 to where we are now in 2015, you see the red. More and more countries, even on the continent, are discovering oil and gas. It's becoming redder. So Nigeria needs to focus on the non-oil sectors. And I think it has the potential to do that.
Okay, what reforms are necessary for that to happen, to allow the private sector to really flourish, where there's been the desire to do so in the banking sector? As you suggested, telecommunications and mobile banking has been extraordinary. But what additional reforms are necessary to make that happen in this next administration?
Well, let me just say, in this past administration, we did a lot of work to unleash the possibilities for the private sector. We focused on agriculture, for instance, and creating most of the 1.4 million jobs we created were in this sector, turning it into a business and making young people interested in going into it. The reforms have to do, of course, with providing the right incentives, creating the right business environment, removing bureaucracy. We still have a lot of work to do there, but I think that there's enough now that people are excited in coming in. Let's just take manufacturing. We've got Nissan, Toyota, so many other companies coming in to assemble car plants. We have an emerging auto industry. Assembly first, but eventually it's going to go into manufacturing. You have GE that has just pledged to invest $1 billion and has actually started in various sectors, including power and also health in Nigeria. You have Unilever that has just committed 150 million euros to expand. And as I said, Procter & Gamble, $250 million. But we have our own domestic private sector. I think the biggest mark of whether the private sector finds a country interesting or not is whether your own domestic people are investing. And our investors are doing that. I think the Dangote has just started a big petrochemical complex for $9 billion with refining, because refineries are a problem, and other types of petrochemicals linked to that. So we need to continue to provide the right incentives, the right signals to be open and transparent so that business people can feel, that they can do business in the country. We've made a very good start. Let me just mention quickly that even housing, it's amazing to me. If you go to the UK, the US, the housing sector is something they watch almost on a daily, monthly basis. Have you noticed that many African countries, even many developing countries, the housing sector is not really seen as a source of growth? It's
vital.
It's a non-tradable sector. So people don't look at it, but it's vital, but nobody looks to develop it. Well, we started to do that. And Cantor Fitzgerald has just come in and pledged to put in about $1 billion over the next few years into our housing sector because they believe the reforms we've done there to create the Nigerian Mortgage Refinance Institution to be able to securitize mortgages and create a market there, that's very interesting.
Okay. I've got to get to some very tough subjects. So consider this tough love because you can handle anything I can throw at you. Yeah, that's what I said. I don't think there's a problem there. In fact, I'm not sure if I should be ducking when I ask these questions or not. First and foremost, and we've had this conversation before, you've made progress in terms of rankings with Transparency International on the corruption index. And I know this past week, for example, you were wrestling with the oil marketers because there's a shortage of cash, and the revenues have dropped because the oil prices have dropped. What needs to be done at the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation to root out corruption? There's a petroleum law that's been sitting there for years. What will happen if it gets passed? What needs to happen to get it through the parliament?
I think that for Nigerians, first of all, for the past 40, 50 years, the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation has been the way it's been and functioning. I think there's a demand now in the modern world perhaps to see the law passed, the petroleum industries bill. Why? Because it contains provisions that would actually open up the NNPC, move it towards commercialization so that it can be more transparent, its books will be open. And this is what almost every Nigerian wants. So that it is vital that that law be passed. And once it is passed, implementing this will not be easy, but it should be the big job that the government will focus on.
It's been parked there for 4 years.
Yes, the legislature, I think, has not passed it for various reasons. I think, and I'm going to say something perhaps politically incorrect, but there are vested interests inside the country and there are vested interests outside the country, and I say it's politically incorrect because I've been also talking to the oil companies and saying, allow this to pass. It has a fiscal regime that is harsher than the one we had before for the oil companies, meaning that they will pay us more. So they are not particularly favorable to it, and many of them don't want to see it passed. But also our own vested interests don't want to see it passed. But I believe for now, the bill may not be perfect, but it should be pushed to be passed so that we can always amend and make it better, but it contains the essential elements to really open up the sector much more. That's the key to transparency.
Okay, North-South divide. It's been there for decades.
Did I do okay?
Yeah, you did. So. I'm not too sure if it's easy to say the politically incorrect things as you're exiting out the door or not.
No, I've always said it. You know, that's been my hallmark. I've never shied away. I'm sure Peter will tell you. I say politically incorrect things all the time.
Good. The other thing I was going to talk to you about, Mr. Sanusi, Lamida Sanusi, was on my panel in Davos in 2013, and he actually said in the green room before coming out, John, I'm going to drop a bomb on this roundtable. I didn't know what he was talking about. And he proceeded to say that there was $20 billion lost between January 2012 and July 2013, adding after the time I saw him in February 2013. Is that an exaggeration of what was lost in the system? And he was trying to get the global attention to try to get pressure from the outside to reform inside? Or what have we found?
Well, what we did, when first of all, when Governor Lamido Sanusi, who is now Emmy and whom I have great respect, we work together as colleagues, he made the first accusation that 49 billion was missing. At that time, he was governor of the central bank. Again, this is maybe not politically correct, but he's my banker. Before he made the accusation, he didn't call me. He didn't say, hello, finance minister, money is missing. And I always ask people, I said, you know, just imagine the UK, they've just won the election. If Mark Carney found 50 billion almost missing from the accounts, would he call David Cameron first or he would call George Osborne? I think he would call George Osborne and say, George, let's try and figure out what is happening here. So my problem had always been I was not even told. He wrote a letter to the president, and the letter leaked, and it came out. Then he called me 2 days later, and I said, why didn't you call me first? So we sat down, we tried to figure it out, and it turned out that that figure was not correct. If we earned, as Pricewaterhouse found out, $67 billion from oil during the period, if 49 was missing, I think Nigerians would notice it, wouldn't they?
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah. So that turned out not to be a correct thing. But later on, he raised the issue of 20 billion. On our side, in the Ministry of Finance, had been every month we reconcile figures. We've been on top of this. And every month, the NNPC withholds some payments it's supposed to make into the Federation account. They withhold it to pay themselves for certain subsidies like kerosene. They withhold it for operational losses, things that they shouldn't be withholding. And so we've always recorded this and said you need to disburse that money. Now, so when the second accusation of 20 billion was made, really at that point in time, I felt that the reputation of the country was being very severely damaged. Because imagine the numbers. And I, at that time, called for a forensic audit by an independent auditor, and I called for it during a Senate hearing. The president backed me up on that, asked the Auditor General to launch the audit. The Auditor General hired PricewaterhouseCoopers, which is well known to everybody in the world. PricewaterhouseCoopers has done the audit. They released the highlights, and initially the full report was not released. So again, it looked like something was being hidden. But a week ago, the full report is on the website, on the internet for everybody to see. And what they have done is go through the full amount of monies earned during that period and account for it. So what they found is that, they withheld, just as we said, they withheld, let's say, 3.38 billion to pay themselves for kerosene subsidies, which they provided. And we said, we didn't put that in the budget, so maybe you should not have withheld it. You need to disburse it to the budget. They claimed some money for operational losses. Well, you're a business. I mean, I don't have to be punished as government for your operational losses. Things like, so they accounted for this. And at the end of the day, they said, okay, there's 1.48 billion they need that is not accounted for. But that does not mean, it means the rest they withheld should also be paid to the budget. But it's been laid out. That is not to say that we don't have problems in our oil sector.
But that's
that
pretty
need to be looked
transparent,
at.
is what you're saying.
But what I'm saying is that Pricewaterhouse has done a job. But because I think the 20 billion has not been found, in somebody's drawer or something, there's a refusal to even look at the audit of Pricewaterhouse. What else can you do if Pricewaterhouse audits and lays out where the monies have gone?
So you're comfortable that this
number
wasn't in existence? You've cleaned it out, you found some improprieties?
What the audit shows is that the numbers that should come into the budget that we had, about 10.8 billion, which is large enough, should be paid into the budget by the NNPC. And they've shown where it was. So I think people should look at the audit and its merits. I think the government has done what it needs to do, called in a big firm, said, do this, expose it to the world. So we need to believe the audit. People don't want to be. So I don't know what else you can do. If you make an accusation, there's a forensic audit, the audit is put to the public. Then now you just need to focus on correcting the mistakes or issues so that the monies that need to be returned to the Treasury are returned. Remember, I'm a finance minister, so if there's even $1 that needs to be returned to the Treasury, I'm up for it.
Good. I brought up this subject before, but I wanted to finish on the issue of cleaning up the state oil company. But the North-South divide, and you suggest that there's some foreign direct investment that's been going into not the Northeast, but other parts of the North, like Kano, and the fact that both Nigerian companies and international companies are willing to go in. But how do you close that per capita income gap correctly so it doesn't create a vacuum for an organization like Boko Haram?
Yeah, first of all, let me say two things. The factories, sorry, I talked about investments. It's true, most of the investments are happening south of the border, but I just mentioned that Kano is the second largest city in Nigeria. It's a heavy industrial center with a population of more than 6 million. And it's a center of manufacturing. And I'm very hopeful that as things settle down, the investments will begin to migrate back there. But investment is coming into the country, largely in the south. Now, for the Northeast, let us be very clear that trying to get one answer, unidimensional answer to Boko Haram is incorrect. It is a complex problem. It is a global problem. The Boko Haram phenomenon is part of the ISIL, and now we are working on it. However, it has two dimensions. There's the ideological one, because what they're saying is Western education is forbidden. So it's not all, even if you put, I don't want us to make the mistake, even if you populate this place and clean up the income problem and so on, if these people are ideological, you're still going to have an issue. But what happens is that ideology enables people who are poor, who have nothing to hope for. It now makes it easier for them to join that. So that's why you need to tackle the poverty. But I don't want us to make the mistake that the only reason for Boko Haram is because people don't have jobs. People don't have jobs, that feeds it. But that's not the only thing. Now, coming to the issue, I think that the northeast of Nigeria has the worst poverty indicators in the country, the worst human development. And you need to tackle it in two ways. Nigerians normally don't like handouts, so the biggest thing is creating jobs. And what has the best potential there is agriculture. So you've really got to modernize the agriculture. But I believe you have to couple it with a social safety net program. And we are building one now with the help of the World Bank, a conditional cash transfer system, whereby for targeting women, by the way, women and their children, not men, whereby because the women will use the resources better. Whereby, so it's targeting a woman and her 5 children.
Am I supposed to respond to that, or should you just let it go?
John, I'm just, no, don't respond. If a woman sends her children, particularly girls, to school, because in that area we have serious problem with girls not going to school. That's why the girls who were snatched from school is a problem. So if they bring the girl to school, they receive a cash transfer. They bring the children, but particularly girls. If they bring children for immunization, for healthcare, if they come for prenatal care, because we have a high level of maternal mortality, and that is just not acceptable in the modern world. They get a cash transfer for doing all these things, so that we try to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. I believe such a program that will make inclusion better. It will help in the long term to bring the children up so they have education, they have good health. It will augur well for the future. If you couple that with creating jobs for the unemployed, that will work. And that is the path that this present government that is outgoing had started on. And I believe the next government should and hopefully will continue to do that. That will be the solution.
Good. Is it always a kind of a curse to be mentioned as the next 11? This is what Jim O'Neill did, right? So you had the BRICS, and then his next wave of the most promising economies of the next 11. Nigeria was in that. Then they had the acronym of the MINT, Mexico, Indonesia, Nigeria, and Turkey. As soon as they mention it, those 4 economies start to slow down. Is that what happens?
No.
Have we seen the best of the emerging markets where you're not in the middle income trap, but that commodity-driven boom has run its course, and now it needs to have that diversification? But is it realistic to think that Nigeria can have sustainable growth above 6%?
I think absolutely so. I really do. And, we always say, have we seen the last of this boom? We have business cycles. There will be another boom. But I think that any economy that relies on these booms to grow is not doing the right thing. I think that the emerging markets, the resource-rich economies, as I said, should see the drop in commodity prices. It's not just oil, it's copper, it's iron ore. They should see the drop as an opportunity, not as a curse, not as something bad, but something good to push diversification. That is what will bring sustainable growth, and that is why I have so much hope for my country. Because when you look at the composition of GDP, you find that the economy is very diversified. What does that mean? It means that we have the base to change our revenue profile. Right now, it's 70% oil, 30% non-oil. We can flip it like Mexico did because we can tax better. You know, we can draw revenues from sources in agriculture, in housing, in manufacturing, across the board in business. And it's from small and medium enterprises. But the tax regime has to be sensible, and we have to make sure we also provide services, especially to the SMEs, so that they'll feel willing to pay their taxes. And, you know, I have a little bit of a story, 1 second. We started a program called You Win, Youth Enterprise with Innovation, where we give grants to young entrepreneurs. It's wildly popular. They get grants anywhere from $10,000 to $100,000 to put into their business. We have a business competition. Now, you know, we've got about 3,400 of them in. And when they come, you know, they're all doing businesses, they are not registered. We set up a special desk and we register them right away. But I didn't tell them that really you're now entering the tax base.
I was going to say.
So we had a little thing there going, whereby
There's a price to pay for the money we gave you. You have to pay tax.
But they're very proud when they find they're actually registered as a legitimate business. They like it. They want to be part of the formal economy, and they're quite proud to pay whatever little tax they can pay. So people want to be part of contributing if we make it easy.
And transparent.
And transparent for them to do so.
Okay, we have about 10 minutes left because I promised to get you off the stage at 10:45 for your flight. Do we have some microphones, I'm sure, on the floor? We have a hand up here, and then we'll take one here, if I may. If we can have the mics ready. I know this is a very efficient group, but we have a hand up here if we can have a microphone too. Please.
Good morning. My name is Jonathan. I'm a research scholar from Argentina. I'd like to ask you, Minister, about your opinion about the African Union, its role for the economy in Nigeria and in other countries in Africa. Is the way the African Union as a regional bloc currently working? If that's the case, to what extent? If it's not, how should it work then?
Great question, because one of the things I was going to ask is, should it be as wide as the African Union, or should we have it in the blocks with the Western African states, ECOWAS, or the Sub-Saharan states, and leave it as that? Can the African Union formalize to be similar to the European Union, or something different?
I think the African Union, if you trace its history when it was the OAU, has changed enormously. And it's really delivering. Where are the areas where it's most effective? When you talk about, trying to help with violence and conflicts and peace building, I think that it's done a very good job in trying to get the African countries together. On taking a common front on economic issues, on pandemics, it's also been doing a good job.
Yes.
On Ebola recently, the AU galvanized African countries to also make their own contribution, just that people outside didn't hear too much about it. But Africans are really AU is doing so much more to get Africans to focus on their own problems than we did previously. So I think it's needed. Should it go the path of the European Union, I think we should look for modifications, because we don't want sort of an enormous bureaucracy that is... Oh, sorry.
At least you said it on neutral turf. This is Switzerland.
Yes, this is Switzerland. But we want something that doesn't become a very big bureaucracy and can deliver services. So along those lines, I think it's yielding. Now, that does not mean that you should not have the regional blocks. Why is that? Because for economic purposes, the regional blocks are very useful. If you take West Africa, Nigeria is about 78% of the GDP of West Africa now. And, you know, if it forms a very tight economic bloc, you know, we can absorb goods produced in other countries can be sold in Nigeria because it's a large country. We can equally form a center of manufacturing and we can have trade. but once we improve our infrastructure. So I think the East Africans are doing quite well on the economic front. The West Africans are doing well with resolving peace and conflict issues. And I think and Southern Africa is also doing its bit. So I think the combination of the regional economic communities, we call them the RECs, with the overarching AU is yielding. Can it be improved? Absolutely.
But it's come a long ways in 10 years.
But it's come a long ways, and I'm quite proud of the direction in which it is going. The AU, for instance, has started an organization where Africa is leading. I just came from a meeting in Berlin on climate risk insurance. Do you know that the AU has started an organization with 25 African member countries that is called the African Risk Capacity that provides insurance to countries against weather-based events? Did you know that? And, you know, this is amazing. We were brought up as an example. I'm the chair of that. So Africa leads in many ways. It's just you never hear that story. You have to tell it more.
Okay. There's a little trade-off, right? So we put a little bit of pressure on. You guys become more transparent. You pass laws for the National Oil Company, then we focus on diversification. It's a give and take in the meeting, wouldn't you say?
Okay.
Maybe. There are questions here. And we have another question here in the back, please, as well. If we can get the microphone back there. Thank you.
My name is Manu Chandaria, and we are in Nigeria since like 35 years. Tova Aluminium, Midgel Steel, and a number of other companies that we got there. And we were the first one for 25 years. We were in Maiduguri.
Okay.
Finally, we had to close and come back. But what we see in this 35 years is an expansion, that the power has become a major, major problem. You never run anything in Nigeria unless power is there. Now, I'm glad on one side that oil price has gone down. You're focusing on something which is really give work and a possibility of expansion. But power still is a major problem.
Yes.
What do you think that, how you're going to manage that? Kenya used to be 1,300 megawatts, and by within coming 3 years, we'll have 4,000 megawatts. So I think that there is a necessity that no growth can take place based on diesel running machines.
Yes.
Thank you.
Another excellent question. Go ahead.
Yes, excellent and very legitimate. Power is a big constraint on Nigeria's growth. And for years and years and years, the government tried to run the power company, and it just wasn't working. You know, we just were not providing the service needed. Things were not being maintained. Additional capacity was not being added, and things were run down for 3 decades. The serious problem we have is that if you've run things down for 3 decades, reforming it takes that much time, but people are impatient. So what the government decided to do, starting 10 years ago, was do something unprecedented and say, okay, there's no need hitting your head against a brick wall trying to solve a problem. We will privatize the power sector. So Nigeria prepared for a decade, and as you can imagine, like NNPC, anything you want to do, vested interests over time will try and stop you in any which way. But we managed finally to sell off our distribution assets, our generation assets, and you know we only have now transmission. This happened during the administration that is now in place. Now, having sold it off, and it was done in a very open, transparent way with open bids, and big companies, AES and Enron and everybody else, AES, sorry, came in, and GE and others came in and bid, and many of them got assets. Nigerian companies also bid. In fact, they had to be in partnership with people from outside. What we are now facing is a shortage of gas. Why is that? We have lots of gas, but we don't have the pipelines. The distribution network is still being built to pipe this gas to where it is needed. So we have encouraged private sector people to come in and invest in gas. And some of that, Seven Energy is just launching something. We've got Azura coming in. So more and more of that is happening. So what I'll say is now there's still a problem. But as the gas infrastructure comes in, we can get gas to these plants. And that will take maybe another couple of years, I think, for us to begin to see progress.
Good. We have one other question there. Do you have a microphone? Thank you. It'll be the
Hi.
final question. Thank you.
Right. Hi, good morning. I'm Darlene. I'm from the Philippines, but I'm studying in Singapore. Back in January, I read an article from Forbes magazine. The article states that Nigerian elites spend $2 million for their dream weddings. The same article also states that the new money Nigerians are very concerned with flaunting their wealth. They're very extravagant, they're very luxurious. My question is, do you think the Nigerian elites are doing their part and doing enough in alleviating the social conditions in Nigeria, in alleviating poverty?
The answer is no. The Nigerian elite are not doing enough. And there are people who flaunt their wealth. You know, I mean, like, it's a democracy. Fortunately, unfortunately. So you cannot go and get the people and force them. But what we must do is to have better redistribution, which means a better taxation system. And right now we put a tax on luxury goods, you know, so if you have yachts, if you have planes and so on, there's now a luxury goods tax to try and take some of that money and redistribute it to people who are less well off. So the state must do more. You know, to take care of that. Yeah, you know, so I really do feel that there has to be a mechanism. Now, Nigeria's growth, and this is one of the weaknesses we've had, like much in the world. You heard President Obama say that 99% of the wealth created in the US in the past few years was taken by 1% of the population. So there's a problem of inequality. That's why Piketty wrote the famous book. There's a problem of inequality, growth with inequality all over the world. Nigeria has not escaped that. Our Gini coefficient, which measures inequality, the closer to 100, the more unequal, has moved, you know, over the past decade from about 0.32 to about, 0.38 to about 0.48. But in comparison, Brazil, which has done a lot in bringing down inequality, is 0.55. South Africa is 0.63. The OECD countries are about 0.32. You know, so China is about 0.42. I'm just saying it because people are so down on Nigeria. And when people hear some of these things, these numbers, they say, oh, really? You know, I mean, so we have growing inequality. We don't want it. That is why we must reverse and look at those sectors where the poor are concentrated. Agriculture, we must do better. We must provide social services, housing. We must put manufacturing in attention on that so as to create decent jobs for people. Nigerians don't really want handouts. They want jobs. So it's jobs, jobs, jobs. We must focus on jobs. And that's how we are going to solve or begin to cut back on inequality.
Good. In 30 seconds, because I know you have to run, speaking of jobs, what's on your agenda next?
Sleep.
It's a pleasure to see you. I just want to remind the audience, we're not going to take a break. My colleague Stephen Sacker is going to take the stage, along with the former Secretary General of NATO. Another warm round of applause and safe travels back.
Thank you.